Starvation was actually the primary driver of human innovation, not the enemy of it. Imagine you are standing in the East African Rift Valley 2.5 million years ago. The sun is a relentless hammer against the dry earth, and the lush forests your ancestors called home have vanished. They've been replaced by a shimmering golden savanna that offers no fruit and no shade. You are not a predator with claws, and you are not a grazer with four stomachs to process grass. You are an ape with a growing brain and a shrinking food supply, and the gnawing ache in your stomach is the only thing louder than the wind. This is the moment where our story begins, not with a feast, but with a desperate, impossible choice. Most species, when faced with this kind of total caloric collapse, simply go extinct. They wait for the rain that never comes and they fade into the fossil record. But our ancestors did something that contradicts every rule of evolutionary biology. They didn't just find a new food source. They re-engineered their entire existence around the sensation of being empty. They turned hunger into a tool. This isn't just a story about what we ate, but about how the threat of having nothing to eat forced us to become the most dangerous and adaptable creatures on the planet. But it wasn't the lack of fruit that almost killed us. It was the realization that the best food was locked away where we couldn't reach it. Around 2.6 million years ago, a hominin known as Australopithecus was struggling. The climate was drying out, and the reliable vegetation was disappearing. However, the savanna was covered in the remains of massive animals left behind by saber-toothed cats. There was meat there, but more importantly, there was bone marrow. Marrow is a caloric goldmine, packed with the fats needed to fuel a primate brain, but it's protected by thick, heavy bone that no jaw can crush. Dr. Brianna Pobiner from the Smithsonian Institution has spent years examining thousands of animal bones from this era, specifically at a site called Kangera South in Kenya. What she found changed our understanding of human survival. She discovered distinct butchery marks that appeared before the tooth marks of predators. This means our ancestors weren't just scavenging leftovers. They were getting to the carcasses first and using stones to smash open the long bones. They were eating the one thing no one else could get to. This marrow revolution was our first major pivot. We became the world's first specialized scavengers, using rocks as external teeth to access high-energy fats. This influx of calories didn't just keep us alive. It provided the metabolic fuel for our brains to start growing. We were literally eating the internal organs of stones to survive, and in doing so, we began the long process of becoming human. Actually, having access to fat and marrow didn't make life easy. It just made the stakes of the hunt much higher. As we move forward to about 1.8 million years ago, we see the emergence of Homo erectus. This was the first of our ancestors to look truly human, with long legs built for distance, but they faced a massive problem. The more their brains grew, the more energy they required, and scavenging for marrow wasn't enough to support a growing population. They needed fresh meat, but they still lacked the speed of a cheetah or the strength of a lion. To solve this, they leaned into a physiological trait that sounds like a weakness. We are the only primates that sweat profusely and have no fur. While the antelope and kudu of the plains could outrun a human in a sprint, they couldn't shed heat while running. This led to the development of persistence hunting. Our ancestors would find a target and simply walk it to death in the midday sun. They would track an animal for hours, never letting it rest, never letting its body temperature drop. Eventually, the animal would collapse from heat stroke. This was a cognitive breakthrough as much as a physical one. To do this, you have to be able to envision a meal that isn't there yet. You have to stay hungry for 4 hours to eat for 4 days. It required a level of persistence and mental mapping that no other animal possessed. We didn't hunt with weapons yet. We hunted with our ability to endure the heat that our prey could not. Even with these incredible hunting skills, the environment was about to throw a curveball that almost wiped our entire lineage off the map. Fast forward to approximately 70,000 years ago. This is a period of intense debate among scientists, often centered around the Toba supereruption in Indonesia. Whether it was a singular volcanic winter or a more gradual shift in global climate, the genetic evidence is clear. The human population plummeted. Some estimates suggest there were as few as 10,000 breeding pairs of humans left on the entire planet. We were an endangered species. This was the ultimate hunger test. The traditional hunting grounds were failing and the plants were dying. This bottleneck forced a massive migration. Humans began to move out of Africa, not because they wanted to explore, but because they were being chased by their own shadows. They followed the coastlines, turning to the sea for the first time. In places like Pinnacle Point in South Africa, researchers have found evidence of early humans harvesting shellfish and whales. This was a radical shift. Moving from the savanna to the coast required new tools and a new understanding of the lunar cycles and tides. We survived this bottleneck by becoming generalists. We learned that when the land is empty, the ocean might be full. It was during this period of extreme scarcity that we likely developed the complex symbolic thought and language needed to coordinate across vast distances. We talked because we were hungry, and we needed to share the news of where the food had gone. But as much as the sea provided a temporary refuge, the world was about to freeze, and the hunger would take on a new, more lethal shape. About 25,000 years ago, during the last glacial maximum, humans were pushed into refugia, small pockets of land that were still habitable amidst the encroaching ice sheets. In these frozen landscapes, the rulebook changed again. You couldn't just wander and find food. You had to plan for months of nothingness. This is where we see the rise of megafauna specialists. Humans in northern Eurasia began to hunt mammoths, not just for their meat, but for their entire utility. A single mammoth could feed a group for weeks, but killing one was a high-risk, high-reward gamble that often ended in death. To manage this risk, humans developed a unique social structure that Dr. Kristen Hawkes calls the grandmother hypothesis. While the young men were away on dangerous, often fruitless hunts, the older women, grandmothers who were past their reproductive years, took on the role of gathering stable, low-quality foods like tubers and roots. They provided the caloric floor that kept the children alive when the hunters came back empty-handed. This allowed humans to live longer than other primates. Because grandmothers were so vital to survival during periods of starvation, evolution favored families where women lived long after they stopped having children. Our very social structure, where multiple generations lived together, was an insurance policy against the days when there was nothing to eat. You might think that once the ice melted, the hunger ended, but the warming world actually created a crisis of its own. As the glaciers retreated around 12,000 years ago, the massive herds of mammoths and bison began to disappear. The easy calories of the Ice Age were gone. This led to what archaeologist Kent Flannery called the broad-spectrum revolution. Instead of focusing on one or two big animals, humans started eating everything, and I mean everything. We find evidence from this period of people eating small snails, tiny birds, toxic acorns that required hours of leaching, and grass seeds that were so small they seemed barely worth the effort. This looked like a step backward. Why spend all day gathering tiny seeds when you used to hunt giant elk? The answer is that the population had grown too large to rely on big game. We were forced to diversify. This period was the true birth of the kitchen. We developed grinding stones, roasting pits, and storage baskets. We learned how to process foods that were otherwise inedible. This was the era of the starvation foods becoming staples. We weren't eating these things because we liked them. We were eating them because the alternative was death. But in learning to process these difficult plants, we were accidentally laying the groundwork for the most significant change in human history. We were becoming experts on the very plants that would eventually become our masters. Contrary to what we are often told, the move to farming wasn't a breakthrough of genius, but a desperate move by people who were running out of options. For decades, we believed that humans discovered agriculture and settled down to enjoy a more stable life. But the skeletal evidence tells a much darker story. Early farmers were shorter, had more dental cavities, and showed signs of massive nutritional stress compared to their hunter-gatherer ancestors. This is what scientist Jared Diamond famously called the worst mistake in the history of the human race. So why did we do it? Because 10,000 years ago, the climate became unpredictable. The wild stands of grain that people had been harvesting began to fail. To ensure they had something to eat, people started protecting these patches, clearing away weeds, and eventually planting seeds. We didn't choose farming. We were trapped into it by a growing population and a shrinking wild food supply. Once you start farming, you can't go back. You have more children to help with the crops, which means you need more food, which means you need more land. We traded a diverse, healthy diet for a monotonous, reliable one because we were terrified of the nothing months. This transition fundamentally rewired our biology and our society. We went from being a species that moved to find food to a species that stayed to defend it. We invented the concept of property because we were afraid of going hungry again, but our bodies didn't just change their habits. They changed their internal chemistry to handle the cycles of feast and famine. This is where the science gets truly fascinating. Researchers like Dr. Michael Richards at the Max Planck Institute have used stable isotope analysis to look at the protein sources of ancient humans. By looking at the nitrogen and carbon isotopes in bone collagen, they can tell exactly what someone was eating tens of thousands of years ago. What they found was that humans have an incredible metabolic flexibility. We can switch from a 100% meat diet to a 100% plant diet in a way that most animals cannot. But there's a catch. Because our ancestors spent so much time with nothing to eat, our bodies became incredibly efficient at storing fat. We have what scientists call thrifty genes. In the ancient world, the person who could gain the most weight from a single kill was the person who survived the winter. Hunger was the primary selective pressure on our metabolism. Those who were bad at storing fat died during the lean years. This is why, in the modern world of endless calories, we struggle so much with obesity. We are biologically programmed to act as if the food is about to run out at any second. Our DNA is still living in the Pleistocene, constantly whispering to us to eat everything in sight because tomorrow might be the day the savannah goes dry. Actually, this genetic legacy isn't just about fat. It's about how our brains function under pressure. When a human is hungry, their cognitive abilities don't just decline. In the short term, they actually sharpen. Studies on fasting have shown that after a certain period without food, the body enters a state of high alertness. This was an evolutionary necessity. If you are starving, you can't afford to be lethargic and depressed. You need to be at your absolute smartest to find that next meal. This spike in focus is why some of our greatest technological leaps happened during periods of extreme environmental stress. We invented the bow and arrow, the fishing hook, and the ceramic pot not during times of plenty, but during times of scarcity. We are a species that solves problems best when the problem is survival. If ancient humans had always had enough to eat, we would likely still be sitting in the shade of a fruit tree in Africa. We are the products of 1,000,000 years of empty stomachs, and every piece of technology you see around you today is an indirect result of a desperate ancestor trying to solve the problem of the next meal. We didn't just survive hunger, we used it as the fuel for our ascent. Even though we now live in a world where many of us have the opposite problem, too much food, the shadow of ancient hunger still defines our behavior. We see it in the way we hoard resources, the way we compete for status, and the way we experience anxiety about the future. Our ancestors' experience with having nothing to eat created a deep-seated fear of scarcity that we haven't been able to outrun. We are the descendants of the most paranoid, the most efficient, and the most desperate individuals in human history. When you look at a prehistoric tool, you aren't just looking at a rock. You are looking at a physical manifestation of a hunger so deep it forced a primate to rethink the laws of nature. We learned to cook, which allowed us to outsource our digestion to the fire, freeing up even more energy for our brains. This led to a feedback loop: bigger brains, better tools, more food, more people. But it all started with that first Australopithecus looking at a bone that no one else could crack. That single moment of desperation is the foundation of the modern world. It's hard to reconcile the fact that our greatest strength as a species are the direct result of our greatest suffering. We often think of the past as a simpler time, but for our ancestors, it was a constant high-stakes game of caloric chess. They were constantly calculating the energy cost of every move. Should I chase that rabbit? Should I dig for that root? Every decision was a life or death gamble. This constant pressure forged a brain that is obsessed with efficiency and prediction. We are the only animals that can look at a field of green and see a potential harvest 6 months in the future. We are the only ones who can look at a dry riverbed and know where the water will be when the seasons change. This foresight is our greatest tool, and it was sharpened by the whetstone of starvation. We are the only species that has managed to largely escape the trap of the natural food chain, and yet we are still completely ruled by the instincts that the food chain gave us. As we look back across the millions of years of our journey, we see a pattern of crisis and response. Every time the food ran out, we became something new. When the forests died, we became scavengers. When the scavenge was thin, we became hunters. When the big game vanished, we became fishers and foragers. When the wild plants failed, we became farmers. We are the masters of the pivot. But there is a haunting thought at the center of this story. All the things we value about ourselves, our intelligence, our social bonds, our creativity, were not gifts given to us in a garden of abundance. They were the desperate inventions of a creature that was dying of hunger. We are not the people who found the land of plenty. We are the people who learned how to live in the land of nothing, and that legacy is still with us, hidden in our cells and our subconscious, driving us to keep searching, keep gathering, and keep consuming, even when the hunger should have been satisfied long ago. When you look back at that ancestor in the Rift Valley, you realize that their hunger was the spark that lit the fire of civilization. They didn't know they were starting a revolution. They just knew their stomach hurt. But that pain was the most productive force in history. It pushed us out of the trees, across the deserts, through the ice, and onto every corner of the globe. It's a journey that has led us to the modern world, where the threat of starvation has been replaced by the threat of our own success. We have spent 2 million years trying to make sure we never have to feel that ancient ache again, and in doing so, we have built a world that our ancestors wouldn't recognize. But if you were to take a modern human and put them back in that valley, the old instincts would still be there, waiting to be triggered. The nothing is still there, just beneath the surface of our comfortable lives. This brings us to a strange reflection on our place in the universe. Are we actually an intelligent species, or are we just a very sophisticated appetite? We like to think of our history as a series of grand ideas and noble intentions, but it might just be a long list of increasingly complex ways to fill a belly. Every skyscraper, every satellite, and every symphony might just be a byproduct of a biological drive that refused to take no for an answer. Our ancestors looked at an empty world and refused to die. They turned the void into a workshop. And while we may have conquered the hunger that once hunted us, we haven't yet mastered the drive it left behind. We are still moving, still hunting, and still building as if the winter is coming tomorrow. Think about your own life for a moment. Think about that feeling of urgency you have when you're trying to get ahead, or that deep satisfaction you feel when you've secured your future. Is that really you? Or is it the echo of a scavenger from 2 million years ago who just found a fresh carcass? We are living in the most food-secure era in human history, yet we are more anxious about our survival than ever. Perhaps it's because we know, deep down, how thin the ice really is. Our history is a testament to the fact that we are never more than a few failed harvests away from being that desperate primate on the savannah again. We are a species built on the edge of an abyss, and our entire culture is just a bridge we've built to cross it. I want to hear from you in the comments. How do you think our relationship with food today would change if we actually understood the level of desperation our ancestors lived through? Does knowing that our brains were literally built by hunger change how you see your own cravings or your drive to succeed? It's a strange thing to realize that our best qualities were born from our worst moments. If you enjoy these deep dives into the secret history of our species, consider subscribing to help us keep this library of human stories growing. We are the only animals that can look back and see where we came from, and it's a journey worth understanding. Every time you eat, you are participating in a victory that took 2.5 million years to win. You are the end result of 1 million people who refused to starve. We must remember that the marrow-stained rocks of Canberra South and the frozen mammoth pits of the tundra are not just archaeological sites, they are the birthplaces of our modern mind. Our ancestors took the most terrifying experience in the natural world, the slow, quiet approach of starvation, and they used it as a lens to focus their intelligence. They didn't just survive the nothing, they colonized it. We are the descendants of the ones who didn't die, the ones who found a way when there was no way. Every cell in your body is a library of desperate, ingenious hunger. You are a walking monument to 1 million years of missing meals.